The Lost Generation. Despite being a century old, they had issues that would make today's youth nod in empathy. Imagine growing up as a young man or woman back then, just minding your own business, and bam! War, pandemic, economic woes, and social upheaval. Sound familiar? World War I was a real party crasher for this generation. Picture this: 70 million people invited, 8.5 million couldn't make it back home, 21 million got seriously roughed up, and 2 million didn't even get to say it's just a scratch, thanks to disease. As if war wasn't enough, along came the Spanish flu of 1918 to 1920, which decided to play a global game of gotcha, with death toll estimates ranging from 17 to 50 million, and some even saying, why not 100 million? After all that fun, the world plunged into economic chaos, giving birth to the Great Depression in the 1930s. This was the golden era of unemployment, poverty, and a general mood of, why even bother? Popular culture, the knight in shining armor, emerged with early cinema and magazines, offering an escape from the dreary reality. Who wouldn't want to forget their troubles with a little black and white movie magic? Women finally got the vote in 1920. About time. New job opportunities sprang up for unmarried women, especially those who, thanks to the war, had become reluctant members of the Young Widows Club. This period also saw the rise of the flapper, a new breed of young women who said, "To heck with the old ways," and embraced a lifestyle of rebellion, recklessness, and all-night parties. Today, we look back at the lost generation and see resilience. They survived war, disease, economic collapse, and societal shifts. Some say their story could offer insight into modern or future challenges. But really, it just shows that no matter the era, humans are experts at finding new and inventive ways to say, hold my beer. The Greatest Generation, also known as the World War II generation, these folks are remembered for their heroism, technological innovation, and prosperity. Growing up during this time was like living in an advertisement for progress. Imagine being a kid and seeing the radio, telephone, and automobile become as common as teenagers on TikTok. This era was a cultural buffet in America. Literature, arts, music, and cinema all flourished like never before. The golden age of Hollywood was born, and people flocked to the theaters to watch gangster films, music films, comedy films, and monster films. Because nothing says good times like watching a guy in a rubber suit stomp around a miniature city. Oh, and let's not forget the rise of comic books. Superman and Batman made their grand debuts, proving that even during tough times, people love stories about guys in tights. In the music industry, jazz, blues, gospel, folk, and swing jazz all became the Spotify playlists of the day. The radio was the 1930s version of the internet, influencing millions. Americans tuned in religiously to President Roosevelt's fireside chats, where they learned about the news in an exciting way, if you consider fireside chats thrilling. When it came to serving in World War II, the Greatest Generation didn't mess around. 16 million Americans served, with 38.8% volunteering and 61.2% being drafted. These brave souls served an average of 33 months, which sounds like the ultimate extended stay. There were approximately 671,000 casualties, a grim reminder that heroism often comes with a high price. As of 2023, almost 120,000 of these WWII veterans are still around to tell the tales, proving that they're not just great, but also durable. The Silent Generation. These folks grew up in the shadow of World War II, with their parents witnessing the fall of Nazism and the rise of a new nemesis, communism. Just as they were beginning to figure out adulthood, they were met with a world in social disarray. Thanks, Soviet Union, for betraying those post-war agreements and setting the stage for a 50-year-long staring contest known as the Cold War. Unlike their predecessors who believed in shaking up the system, the Silent Generation mastered the art of keep your head down and work hard. They were the original quiet quitters, diligently working within the system without making a fuss. No dramatic protests or radical revolutions for these folks. They were more about clocking in, doing the job, and clocking out. This generation was heavily influenced by the golden age of radio, which was basically their version of binge-watching Netflix. They also saw the rise of trade unions, the development of transatlantic flight, finally making those vacations to Europe somewhat feasible, and the discovery of penicillin, which was a game changer for anyone who preferred not to die from a simple infection. Baby boomers, the generation that's synonymous with back in my day, and possibly the most famous modern birth cohort. These folks from the 40s, 50s, and 60s sure knew how to keep busy, with 76 million births taking place. That's right, a strong post-war economy and an abundance of confidence led to a baby boom that made rabbits look lazy. Boomers weren't just prolific, they were economic powerhouses. As a core marketing demographic, they shaped entire industries. From toys to records, if boomers wanted it, companies made it. Meanwhile, luxuries like laundry machines, dishwashers, refrigerators, and telephones became standard household items, letting the average American live like the previous generation's upper class. Who knew cleanliness and convenience could be so chic? Technological advances before, during, and after the war, like plastics, television, magnetic tape, transistors, integrated circuits, and lasers, played a crucial role in improving the standard of living, because nothing says progress like a house full of gadgets that occasionally worked as advertised. And let's not forget the cultural explosion. The Boomers era saw the rise of the Beatles, Bob Dylan, the Rolling Stones, and countless other artists who defined the soundtrack of a generation. The music was so good, even future generations would have to admit, okay, you guys got that one right. Generation X, also known as the latchkey generation. These kids came home to empty houses, armed with door keys, thanks to the era of free-range parenting, rising divorce rates, more moms joining the workforce, and the newfound convenience of daycare. It's no wonder they became masters of microwave dinners and TV marathons. Dubbed the MTV generation, Gen Xers were sometimes characterized as slackers, cynical, and disaffected. Imagine growing up after the baby boomers' heyday, only to face declining birth rates and a world where birth control, introduced in 1960 and legalized abortion in 1973, became the norm. It's like their parents took one look at the chaos and thought, let's hit the brakes on this whole having kids thing. But wait. The 1965 Immigration Act brought some demographic changes, injecting new cultural and ethnic diversity into the mix. So, Gen X ended up being more culturally rich than ever before. And let's not forget their music. Alternative rock, hip-hop, punk, post-punk, and heavy metal bands all skyrocketed in popularity. It was a time when you could listen to Nirvana, Run DMC, and Metallica in one sitting and call it a day well spent. Technological innovation was the name of the game for Gen X. With home computing manufacturers like Apple, Commodore, and Atari leading the charge, the world saw the rise of personal computers and video games. The 1970s and 1980s were the golden age of arcades, where quarters went to die, and high scores were life's greatest achievements. Then, Nintendo and Atari decided to bring the fun home, and suddenly, everyone was a gamer. Compared to boomers, Gen Xers were far more educated, flocking to colleges in droves. Individualism and entrepreneurialism became defining traits for this generation, leading them to create little things you might have heard of, like Google, Wikipedia, Amazon, and YouTube. Just minor contributions to modern life. Millennials. Millennials were the first generation to grow up with the internet, mobile technology, and social media. They're commonly described as the first global generation, being connected to the entire world. However, they are also described as the unluckiest generation due to their average and slower economic growth since entering the workforce than any other generation in history, as well as them being weighed down by student debt and childcare costs. Millennials were born at the time of declining fertility rates around the world and are having fewer children than their predecessors. Young people of the 2010 were often criticized for having less sexual intercourse compared to their predecessors when they were at the same age in 2010. The unemployment rate in the United States reached a record low at 19%. And these economic difficulties have led to a dramatic increase in youth poverty unemployment, and a large number of them living with their parents. Millennials are also less likely to be religious than their predecessors, though many identify as spiritual millennials. However, as they are often characterized for their digital fluency, diverse perspectives, and a strong sense of social consciousness, due to them being born in a time period where global news and information can be retrieved in seconds. Millennials are very active socially and politically, and not afraid to use their voice, and despite the previously mentioned economic troubles they face, more than 8 in 10 feel confident in their finances, which is reprise of their generally positive outlook in a more complicated world. Generation Z. Zoomers, or Generation Z. They're not all that different from millennials, but there are some key differences that make them stand out in the generational lineup. While millennials were exposed to the internet and smartphones during their formative years and had to awkwardly stumble through the digital revolution, Zoomers were practically born with a smartphone in hand and a Wi-Fi connection as their umbilical cord. Zoomers grew up amidst a whirlwind of social justice movements, a new and rather entertaining, chaotic era of American politics highlighted by the rise of Donald Trump and the Black Lives Matter protests. Let's not forget the cherry on top, a global pandemic that locked them down and robbed many of the quintessential high school and college experiences. Who needs prom when you can have a Zoom party, right? In the attention and dopamine economy, apps like YouTube and TikTok have transformed not just how information is consumed, but what information gets spewed out. Millennials might have started the whole meme culture as a joke, but Zoomers turned memes into tools for spreading ideas faster than you can say, "Okay, boomer." Ramp theories. There are 4 types of ramp theory. First is straight ramp theory. The straight ramp theory suggests that a long straight ramp was constructed to haul the stone blocks up to the construction site. This ramp would have extended from the base of the pyramid to the top, allowing workers to drag the stones up the incline. The primary challenge with this theory is the sheer length and volume of material required to build such a ramp, especially as the pyramid grew taller. The ramp would need to be extended and heightened continuously, making it a massive engineering project in itself. Zigzagging ramp theory. The zigzagging ramp theory proposes that a series of zigzagging ramps were used to move the stones. These ramps would have zigzagged up the sides of the pyramid, reducing the steepness of the incline and making it easier to haul the heavy blocks. This method would have required less material than a straight ramp and could have been more manageable in terms of construction and maintenance. However, it would still have been a complex and labor-intensive process. Spiral ramp theory. The spiral ramp theory suggests that a spiral ramp was built around the pyramid, allowing workers to drag the stones up in a circular path. This theory posits that the ramp spiraled around the exterior of the pyramid, providing a continuous path to the top. The advantage of this method is that it would have required less material than a straight ramp and could have been more stable. However, it would have posed challenges in terms of turning the heavy blocks at the corners and maintaining the ramp's structural integrity as the pyramid rose. Internal ramp theory. The internal ramp theory, proposed by architect Jean-Pierre Houdin, posits that internal ramps were used within the pyramid structure to move the stones upward. According to this theory, a series of internal ramps were constructed inside the pyramid, spiraling up through the structure. This method would have allowed workers to transport the stones without the need for massive external ramps. The internal ramps could have been dismantled or incorporated into the pyramid as construction progressed. This theory is supported by some evidence of voids and anomalies within the pyramid that could correspond to such ramps. Lever and pulley theories. The lever systems theory proposes that levers were used to lift the stones into place. This method leverages the mechanical advantage provided by levers to reduce the amount of force needed to lift heavy blocks. Several variations of this theory exist, each suggesting different ways levers could have been employed. Incremental lifting. This method involves lifting the block incrementally by prying up alternating sides of the block and inserting wooden or stone shims to gradually move the stone up one course. This technique was experimentally tested by researchers like Eisler, who was able to lift a block up one tier in approximately 1 hour and 30 minutes using wooden shims or cribbing. Herodotus machine. According to the ancient Greek historian Herodotus, a series of machines made of short wooden planks were used to lift the stones from one level to the next. This machine worked by placing a block upon a central pivot point and using ropes or levers to rock the block back and forth, allowing a slab of wood to be inserted underneath. This process would be repeated to lift the block incrementally between levels of the pyramid. Counterweight system. The counterweight system theory suggests that counterweights were used in combination with levers and pulleys to lift the stones. This method involves using heavy counterweights to balance and lift the stone blocks, reducing the amount of manual labor required. Key elements of this theory include counterweight mechanism. Large, standard-sized blocks were used as counterweights to hoist the heavier granite beams. For example, to counterbalance a granite block of 50 tons, 8 limestone blocks of 5.6 tons each were used as counterweights. These counterweights were hauled up in the usual way, and then used to lift the granite beams to the required height rope and pulley configuration. The counterweight system often involved a complex rope and pulley configuration. The weight of the counterweights would be divided by the pulley system, reducing the force needed to lift the stones. For instance, a double pulley system could divide the weight by 4, making it easier for workers to reset the counterweight. The limestone concrete theory, also known as the geopolymer theory, suggests that the blocks used to build the pyramids were not quarried and transported, but were instead made from a mixture of disaggregated limestone and a geopolymeric binder, which was poured into molds. This theory was first proposed by French chemist Joseph Davidovits in the late 1970s and has since gained some support from various researchers and materials scientists. Key elements of the limestone concrete theory include geopolymeric binder. The theory posits that the ancient Egyptians used a geopolymeric binder, which is a type of cement made from aluminosilicate materials such as kaolinite clay, lime, and natron, sodium carbonate. This binder would react chemically to form a hard, stone-like material. Casting in molds. According to this theory, the limestone blocks were cast in place using wooden molds. The mixture of disaggregated limestone and geopolymeric binder was poured into these molds, where it would set and harden into blocks. This method would have allowed for the precise shaping and fitting of the blocks, accounting for the tight seams observed in the pyramid construction. Chemical and physical evidence. Proponents of the theory point to differences in the chemical composition and physical structure of the pyramid stones compared to natural limestone. Studies have found that some pyramid stones contain microstructural features and chemical signatures that are consistent with a cast material rather than quarried stone. Alien intervention theory. The alien intervention theory proposes that advanced beings from outer space assisted in the construction of the pyramids. This theory is popularized by proponents of the ancient astronaut hypothesis, who argue that the precision and scale of the pyramid's construction could not have been achieved by the ancient Egyptians alone, given their known technological capabilities. Astronomical alignments. Proponents point to the precise alignment of the pyramids with celestial bodies, such as the stars in Orion's belt, as evidence of extraterrestrial involvement. They argue that such precise astronomical knowledge and alignment would have required advanced technology or guidance from beings with superior knowledge. Mathematical sophistication. The theory highlights the advanced mathematical knowledge encoded in the pyramid's design, such as their alignment with true north and the use of the golden ratio. Proponents claim that this level of sophistication suggests the influence of extraterrestrial intelligence. Advanced surveying and alignment. The precise alignment of the pyramids to the cardinal points and the accuracy of their construction suggest the use of advanced surveying techniques. Proponents of this theory argue that the Egyptians may have had access to sophisticated tools for measuring and aligning structures. Skilled laborers, recent evidence. Recent archaeological evidence strongly suggests that the pyramids were built by tens of thousands of skilled workers who were paid for their labor rather than by slaves. This conclusion is supported by multiple findings and analyses from various archaeological sites and historical records. Worker villages and living conditions. Archaeologists have discovered purpose-built villages near the pyramids, such as the one on the Giza Plateau, which housed the workers. These villages included long dormitory-style buildings, communal dining areas, and evidence of well-organized living conditions. The workers were well fed, as indicated by the large quantities of animal bones, cattle, sheep, and goats, found at the site, suggesting they received high-quality food burial practices. The tombs of the workers were found close to the pyramids, indicating a place of honor. These tombs contained supplies for the afterlife, such as jars of beer and bread, which would not have been afforded to slaves. Graffiti and records. Graffiti found inside the pyramids, left by the workers themselves, included names of work crews and humorous or prideful inscriptions, such as the Friends of Khufu Gang and the Drunkards of Menkaure.
The Great Depression was a time of intense scarcity. Jobs, money, and food were scarce, so people had to reinvent their menus to survive the prolonged economic downturn. Food that people wouldn't have earlier considered eating was silently gobbled down as they made do with what was readily available. These culinary experiments later came to be known as Depression-era cuisine. Prune pudding. Eleanor Roosevelt, the First Lady of the United States during the Great Depression, was a notable advocate for the home economics movement. She often prepared nutritious and affordable meals inspired by her learnings from Cornell University's home economics department. During these challenging economic times, she introduced prune pudding to her husband, President Franklin Roosevelt, even serving it to guests at the White House. Prunes were a staple during the Great Depression due to their low cost, availability, and long shelf life. Prune pudding became a popular substitute for fresh fruits and more elaborate desserts. The recipe for this simple yet delicious dessert included just prunes, sugar, and egg whites, which were whipped together to create a satisfying treat. Cream chip beef, humorously known as shit on a shingle or save our stomachs, SOS, was a culinary staple during both World Wars and the Great Depression. This peculiar dish has its origins in Pennsylvania Dutch country. The recipe involves salted and dried beef, which is combined with flour, butter, and milk to create a creamy mixture. This is then served over a piece of toast. If available, parsley and pepper were added to enhance the flavor. During tougher times, the beef could be substituted with cheaper meats like goat or wild game. Despite its humble beginnings, cream chip beef remains a nostalgic dish still served in some restaurants and diners in the Mid-Atlantic region today. Hoover stew. Hoover stew is a notable Depression-era dish named after President Herbert Hoover, whom many Americans held responsible for the Great Depression. This economical stew was a common meal in soup kitchens during that time. The stew consists of a thin broth made with sliced hot dog rounds, cooked macaroni, canned tomatoes, and a variety of canned vegetables such as corn, beans, or peas. Its simplicity and affordability made Hoover stew a staple for many struggling families during the Great Depression. Corned beef luncheon salad. Corned beef luncheon salad was another common beef dish during the Great Depression. It was made with canned corned beef, canned corn, canned peas, gelatin, lemon juice, and vinegar, which were set in a bowl or jello mold in the refrigerator. It sometimes also featured mayonnaise, eggs, horseradish, and other vegetables. Dandelion salad. The Great Depression saw people frequently scavenging in their backyards for wild, fresh, edible greens that they could use in cooking. Dandelions were typical produce, so Italian immigrant women in New York City would add this nutritious ingredient to salads, creating a free meal. They would forage and mix these bitter greens with sweet or tangy ingredients to balance the flavor. They usually added whatever they had on hand: olive oil, hard-boiled eggs, cooked white beans, bacon bits, bacon grease, lemon juice, vinegar, salt, and pepper. Kraft macaroni and cheese. In 1937, when the United States was in the throes of the Great Depression, Kraft Foods launched the iconic mac and cheese. The company sold 8 million boxes of the boxed product within a year of its debut. This easy-to-make packaged dish came with a bag of dried pasta and a packet of powdered cheese. Costing 19 cents, it served 4 people and was an inexpensive and quick way to feed a family. This Depression-era meal is popular even today, not only in households in the country but worldwide. Peanut butter stuffed onions. During the Depression, onions were a common and easily grown and stored vegetable, so they were readily available and, most importantly, free. Meanwhile, peanut butter was also inexpensive, so the Bureau of Home Economics devised the recipe for peanut butter stuffed onions as an easy way for American homemakers to feed their families. The recipe for this curious dish was published in many 1930s newspapers and magazines. It eventually found its way onto American dining tables as a healthy, tasty, simple, and low-cost meal that could be served any time of the day. The mishmash consisted of baked onions with peanut butter filling mixed with stale breadcrumbs. These ingredients came together and created a distasteful and disliked dish that people only ate to fill their hungry stomachs. Loaves. Loaves were another mainstay during the Depression. They were usually made from cheap ingredients, but would feature a star ingredient that served as the highlight of the meal. Some popular types of Depression-era loaves were liver loaf, lima bean, and peanut loaf. If people wanted to splurge, they would make an authentic meatloaf and pad it with inexpensive ingredients like crackers or bread. Then, by adding canned soup and ketchup, homemakers could give the dish some extra flavor without costing too much. Vinegar pie. Pie recipes from the 1930s usually tried to recreate fruit pies, like apple pies without fruits, which were hard to come by. Instead, they substituted vinegar for the tartness of fruits and lemons. One popular vinegar-based treat was vinegar pie, also called vinegar cobbler or desperation pie. People created this low-cost dessert with a pie crust filled with apple cider vinegar, flour, unsalted butter, salt, brown sugar, eggs, ground cinnamon, ground nutmeg, cloves, and water. It looked and tasted like custard with a sweet and tangy flavor, while leaving a tingling sensation on the roof of people's mouths. Mock apple pie. Another standard dessert during the Great Depression was the mock apple pie. This pie recipe also tried to mimic the flavor of apples using cheaper ingredients in its filling. A mock apple pie was technically a pastry imposter, as it had no apples. Instead, it used crumbled Ritz crackers, lemon juice, cinnamon, butter, and sugar syrup as humble substitutes for apple pie filling. These ingredients were stuffed in a pie crust and then baked. The cracker's unique texture, rich buttery flavor, and other ingredients created a taste that reminded people of apple pies. This made it a Depression-era favorite. Though the Depression was a challenging time for our country, it's pretty amazing to see how people adapted and got creative for survival.
The Stone Age. In the Stone Age, wealth was measured in terms of survival capabilities and essential resources. To be considered rich, one needed an abundance of food, tools, and materials for shelter and clothing. These materials mainly consisted of wood, animal pelts, organic material like large leaves, sticks, and dirt. Skills in hunting, gathering, and tool-making were invaluable. Forming strong social bonds and alliances within one's tribe or community was crucial for enhancing access to resources and ensuring collective security. The more friends one had, the more potential help and protection they could rely on in times of danger, which was frequent in the Stone Age. Accumulating and managing resources such as animal hides for clothing, flint for tools, and maintaining a steady food supply through effective hunting and foraging were keys to thriving. Survival was synonymous with wealth. Having the resources to make it through each day meant one was well off. There wasn't necessarily coinage in the early Stone Age, and the exact origin of money remains unclear. However, during this period, possessing practical skills and having access to essential life-enabling resources was the pinnacle of wealth. If you had a cozy cave to call home, a few pelts to keep warm, basic flint and obsidian tools for hunting small animals, and a good group of friends, you were set and considered wealthy. Imagine it now. No phones in sight, just you and your closest friends wearing simple loincloths, living in the moment. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? The Bronze Age. The Bronze Age took place between 3300 BC and 1200 BC and marked a significant leap in civilization for several reasons, most notably the production of bronze. While short compared to the Stone Age, which lasted millions of years, the Bronze Age saw significant technological advancements that propelled society forward. Bronze, an alloy made by melting down tin with a larger amount of copper, was easy to produce and readily available. The production of this alloy and the tools made from it allowed for rapid development in both agriculture and warfare. So, what did it mean to be rich during the Bronze Age, and how was wealth measured? During this time, wealth became associated with the control and production of bronze. Being rich meant having access to these metal ores and the knowledge to craft weapons, tools, and ornaments. Trade also became more prominent, so establishing strong trade networks and engaging in commerce were crucial for improving one's wealth. These were some of the earliest economies ever. Additionally, owning agricultural land and livestock, which were crucial for food and trade, signified wealth. For almost the first time, social status also played a role in one's wealth, with leaders often amassing wealth through tribal control over resources. What did it look like to be rich? During the Bronze Age, some of the earliest civilizations emerged, leading to villages and larger communities living in one place. If you were wealthy, you likely had a nicer or larger place, possibly in a prime location near water or farmland. Wealthy individuals also had irrigation systems to bring water to their crops, demonstrating their control over agriculture. Imagine you and your friends wearing more animal pelts in a larger community, living in a bigger mud hut made with wood and nicer materials. You're all sitting around the forge, making bronze swords and other tools. In ancient Sumeria, grain was one of the earliest known currencies, used for trade alongside mysterious clay tokens, suspected to serve as a means of exchange. As the Bronze Age continued, silver became a popular currency, followed by gold. So, in the Bronze Age, if you had social status, access to land, agriculture, and animals, a prime piece of real estate, a steady supply of bronze, and knowledge of tool making, you were well off. Additionally, a large supply of silver and gold made you truly rich. The Iron Age is a fascinating era because it wasn't simply a result of pure evolution and innovation. Up until this point, progress might seem linear, but that's not the case. Near the end of the Bronze Age, several significant factors led to a huge decline in production, literacy, trade routes, wealth, and overall human progress. The transition from the Bronze Age to the Iron Age was considered a dark time for humanity. The Bronze Age was a 2 steps forward, 1 step back situation, and the Iron Age was almost like a redo, but with iron as the new and stronger metal. Despite the setbacks, technological advancements happened quicker during the Iron Age, leading to more rapid human evolution. Wealth in the Iron Age wasn't much different from wealth in the Bronze Age, as many of the same customs and traditions persisted, and the same means of production and wealth accumulation were in play. In the Iron Age, wealth was closely tied to the possession and production of iron. Mastery of ironworking techniques to create durable tools and weapons provided a significant advantage. Rich individuals or communities controlled iron deposits and forges, facilitating trade and enhancing military strength within their communities or even with others. Agricultural advancements continued to be important, so owning and controlling fertile land and livestock remained prominent signs of wealth. Power and influence were often consolidated through warfare and alliances, with wealthy individuals holding positions of authority and accumulating wealth through tribute and trade. The Iron Age still didn't have coinage. Much wealth was held in gold nuggets, gold sheets, gold ornaments, and gold jewelry. Fertile land, livestock, access to iron production, and military power were key indicators of wealth and influence. The medieval era, aka the Dark Ages or the Middle Ages. This era took place immediately after the fall of the Roman Empire, beginning in 476 AD and lasting roughly until 1400 AD. During this time, wealth became more multifaceted and centralized around connections with those in power. Besides the king and other royalty, the wealthiest members of medieval society were the nobility and merchants. The richest merchants were those engaged in long-distance trade, specifically of luxury goods such as spices, silk, and precious metals, all of which were extreme signs of wealth. Although the levels of wealth among nobles varied significantly, the richest nobles were those who controlled the most land and had the closest connections to the monarch. Regardless of whether one was a noble or a merchant, life at the top was quite similar. These individuals had their own castles, fully staffed with servants. They owned large estates and farms maintained by peasants and serfs. They possessed luxury goods, such as expensive dyes, luxurious silk clothing, gold jewelry, and had access to an almost unlimited supply of food and various forms of entertainment. Additionally, the wealthiest in society had access to great education, which was still a rarity for the majority of the population. This included reading, writing, literature, and other scholarly texts. If you were rich during this time period, you had the opportunity to live a life of leisure and luxury. However, the wealth gap during the Middle Ages was severe, and not everyone enjoyed such a lifestyle. Despite their wealth, the rich were not immune to the challenges of the time, such as disease, famine, and war. Imagine hanging out with your friends in a castle lit by torches, being served a leg of lamb by your servant, and drinking from gem-encrusted solid gold goblets. You all cheers and spill wine on your expensive silk shirts, but you don't care because you're so rich. You have a jester in a silly hat come and perform for you, and then you go to bed and do it all again the next day. Seems pretty cool, right? But let's move on. The early modern era. We're getting extremely close to the modern era, but we're not quite there yet. We're currently in the early modern era, which spans roughly from 1500 AD to 1800 AD. This period is one of the most influential in shaping the structure of the world we live in today. Let me explain. In the early modern era, wealth was driven by exploration, trade, and colonization. Nations and individuals who invested in voyages reaped enormous profits from new trade routes and resources. Merchants and bankers accumulated wealth through the global trade of goods like spices, textiles, and precious metals. The rise of capitalism and the establishment of joint stock companies allowed for the pooling of resources and the sharing of risks and rewards. Owning land and engaging in agriculture remained important, but the growing influence of commerce, finance, and manufacturing marked a significant shift in how wealth was perceived and earned. Up until this point, becoming rich often meant owning a cow, some land, and maybe a few pieces of silver, along with having the right connections. But as we entered the early modern era, things changed. We saw early globalization, early capitalism, early colonization, and the foundations for the society we live in today. This was a pretty influential and important 300-year period. So, what did it look like to be rich in the early modern era? In many ways, it was more of the same. Bigger houses, more loot, more money, more connections, more food, more entertainment, bigger boats, and more security. The biggest difference was the means of accumulating these resources. If you were the type of person going on conquests or voyages, your life was extremely hectic, spending months or even years at sea with the risk of coming home empty-handed, or not coming home at all. It was like playing Assassin's Creed Black Flag in real life. But, was everything sunshine and rainbows? Definitely not. There were significant risks and challenges. However, being rich was pretty awesome almost all the time. In the early modern era, we saw for almost the first time how being wealthy began to shift fundamentally. The modern era. And just like that, we've gone from the Stone Age to the modern day. The modern era is kind of blended into the early modern era, so there's no exact start date, but for the sake of this video, we'll consider it from 1800 until the present day. In the modern era, wealth has been increasingly associated with industrialization, innovation, and finance. The Industrial Revolution transformed economies, creating vast fortunes for those who owned factories, mines, and railways. In the contemporary world, wealth is often derived from investments in technology, real estate, and financial markets. Entrepreneurs and business owners who innovate and scale their businesses can achieve substantial wealth. Education and knowledge have become critical assets, and advanced degrees and specialized skills open doors to lucrative careers. Globalization and digital technologies such as the internet have further expanded opportunities for wealth creation across diverse sectors and regions. I would say that the world we live in today is pretty great. We enjoy a lot of modern luxuries and have many amazing opportunities right at our fingertips. Never before has the world been so decentralized, meaning anyone has the opportunity to do great things. In the past, if you were a serf or a peasant working on a noble's farm, you had almost zero chance of being anything more than that. In the modern day, especially in the present day, the number of opportunities to get wealthy, thanks to the internet, is almost limitless. Even at the beginning of the modern era, near the Industrial Revolution, opportunities were starting to present themselves everywhere. Obviously, we got off to a rough start with extreme amounts of child labor, including chimney sweeps, factory workers, and a lot of horrible stuff that definitely wasn't great but made a lot of people rich. So, what does it look like to be rich in the modern day? Fortunately, I don't think I have to paint too much of a crazy picture for you guys. Honestly, in the modern day, wealth is really what you make of it because of the vast amount of opportunities. It can be whatever you want it to be. If you have enough money to sustain yourself, then your wealth could look like living in a van that you own and having enough money coming in on a monthly basis to maintain your lifestyle. Or it could look like the biggest mansion full of the craziest watches and cars and gold doubloons. Let's start with the first one and then move on to the more recent ones. Abraham Lincoln, the 16th President of the United States, was finally catching a break and enjoying a night out at Ford's Theater on April 14, 1865. Little did he know, the real drama wasn't on stage, but behind him. Enter John Wilkes Booth, an actor and Confederate sympathizer who clearly thought the Civil War was just intermission. Booth, who evidently believed subtlety was for amateurs, crept into Lincoln's box with all the grace of a cartoon villain. With his trusty single-shot Derringer, because who needs a reload plan, he took aim and shot the president in the head, right in the middle of the performance. Not to be outdone by the actors on stage, Booth dramatically leapt onto the stage, managing to break his leg but not his overinflated ego, and shouted, "Sic semper tyrannis," which is Latin for "thus always to tyrants," or loosely translated, "Look at me, I'm the misunderstood hero of this tragedy." Chaos ensued as Booth made his theatrical exit, galloping into the night like he was auditioning for the role of a lifetime, leaving behind a nation in shock and securing his spot as one of history's most infamous delusional villains. James A. Garfield, the 20th President of the United States, was having a perfectly ordinary day at the Baltimore and Potomac Railway Station in Washington, D.C. on July 2, 1881. Enter Charles J. Guiteau, a man whose primary qualification for being an assassin was an overabundance of delusional self-confidence. Guiteau, who thought he'd be rewarded with a government job for his service, approached Garfield with the subtlety of a toddler demanding candy. Armed with a revolver, Guiteau shot the president twice because why not double down on bad decisions? Garfield, ever the overachiever, didn't die immediately. Instead, he lingered for several agonizing months, enduring the best, or worst, of 19th century medical care, which probably included a lot of leeches and guesswork. Guiteau, meanwhile, was caught and continued to insist he was just trying to help the country, proving that delusion truly knows no bounds. Ultimately, Garfield succumbed to his wounds, and Guiteau secured his place in history, not as a hero, but as a textbook example of how not to seek a job promotion. William McKinley, the 25th President of the United States, was having a grand old time at the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York, on September 6, 1901. Enter Leon Czolgosz, an anarchist with a flair for the dramatic and a misguided belief that shooting the president would solve all his problems. Czolgosz, who apparently skipped the part about peaceful protest in Anarchy 101, approached McKinley with a concealed revolver, cleverly hidden under a handkerchief. Because nothing screams, "I'm up to no good," like a handkerchief in the middle of a crowd. As McKinley graciously shook hands with attendees, Czolgosz fired 2 shots at close range, proving that his understanding of personal space was as bad as his understanding of politics. McKinley, ever the stoic, initially seemed to handle the situation with surprising calm, but the wounds were severe. Despite the best medical efforts of the time, which, let's be honest, probably involved more guesswork than science, he developed gangrene and died 8 days later. Meanwhile, Czolgosz, who thought he was striking a blow for the common man, ended up being remembered not as a revolutionary hero, but as the guy who ruined the exposition and got the electric chair for his trouble. So much for making a statement. John F. Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, was taking a sunny drive through Dallas, Texas, in a motorcade on November 22, 1963. He was waving to the cheering crowds, probably thinking about what a great day it was, completely unaware that Lee Harvey Oswald was about to turn the day into a historical conspiracy theorist's dream. Oswald, stationed in the Texas School Book Depository, had a rifle and a clear shot, because evidently someone thought book depository sounded like a great place for a sniper nest. As Kennedy's car passed by, Oswald fired 3 shots, hitting the president twice and changing the course of American history in an instant. The scene quickly turned to chaos, with the Secret Service agents frantically responding and the nation plunging into shock. Oswald, the man of the hour, was apprehended soon after, but his moment in the spotlight was cut short when Jack Ruby, a nightclub owner with a hero complex, decided to take justice into his own hands and shot Oswald while he was in police custody. So there you have it. Kennedy's tragic death became the subject of countless investigations, books, and movies, while Oswald ended up more famous for what happened to him post-mortem than for his infamous act. And somewhere in the midst of all this, the American public was left to wonder what might have been if that motorcade ride had just been a little less eventful. In a rally in Pennsylvania in 2024, former President Donald Trump was on stage, delivering one of his signature speeches to a fervent crowd. The atmosphere was electric, with supporters hanging on his every word. Enter an unnamed 20-year-old from Pennsylvania who apparently thought that the best way to express political dissent was with a firearm. Armed with a misguided sense of purpose and a gun, the young man fired a shot that grazed Trump's ear. Trump, ever the showman, seemed momentarily stunned but ultimately unscathed, proving once again that he knows how to make headlines. Unfortunately, the chaos that ensued wasn't as harmless. One bystander tragically lost their life, and 2 other spectators were critically wounded, turning a political rally into a scene of panic and sorrow. The incident was quickly classified as an assassination attempt, with authorities scrambling to piece together the motives behind such a reckless act.
What we're calling an assassination attempt against our former president, Donald Trump. It's still an active crime scene.
The Secret Service says a man attending the rally was killed. A doctor standing nearby tried to help him, performing CPR.
The guy had spun around and was jammed between the benches. He had a headshot here.
Trump raised his fist as he left the stage. On his Truth Social site, the former president said he was shot by a bullet that pierced the upper part of his right ear. I knew immediately that something was wrong, in that I heard a whizzing sound, shots, and immediately felt the bullet ripping through the skin. He wrote, much bleeding took place, so I realized then what was happening. He was treated at a local hospital and released hours later.
A New York Times photographer captured what appears to be one of the bullets.
Hear these 4 shots and everybody's screaming drop, and you can see the blood like splatter on his face, and the Secret Service just barricades him.
The Secret Service says the gunman was outside the cordoned off area of the rally, standing on an elevated structure, and that he was shot and killed by a member of the agency's counter-assault team.
We're not prepared at this time to provide the identity of the potential shooter. We're in the process of doing the confirmation.
Some rally attendees say they tried to warn police after spotting the suspect.
There's a guy on the roof with a rifle, and the police were like, huh, what? You know, like they didn't know what was going on.
If he was doing the job, I wouldn't even be doing this. I'd be at some beautiful place with the gorgeous ocean, the Mediterranean.
Look, they're all pointing.
The Atlantic, maybe the Pacific.
Yeah, someone's on top of the roof. Look. There he is right there. Right there, see him? He's laying down, see him?
Yeah, he's laying down.
Instead, I'm here with you fighting like hell to get a sentence.
What's happening?
And to make sure we take back the White House, because if we do, we're going to make America better than ever before. We're going to make it.
Yeah, look. There he is.
Easy, because we have millions and millions of people in our country that shouldn't be here. Dangerous people. Criminals. We have criminals. We have drug dealers. We have people that should not be here.
Right on the roof.
It's much tougher than it happens.
You went right on the roof, big guy.
As Trump continued to dominate the news cycle, this event added yet another chapter to his already eventful post-presidential saga, reminding everyone that in the world of politics, the line between drama and danger is often a thin.
Throughout human history, nothing has been a bigger crowd pleaser than religion, especially when it comes to claiming lives. Every era boasts its own shining examples of religious fanaticism gone wrong. In the realm of early modern history, the Spanish Inquisition really outdid itself, snagging the top prize for enthusiasm and turning devotion into devastation. For nearly 400 years, the Spanish Inquisition truly excelled in 2 areas: spreading Catholicism and becoming the gold standard in punishing non-believers, because nothing says devotion quite like a side of torture. First off, the Spain Inquisition wasn't just a hit in Spain. Oh no, it had to go global. It kicked off in Spain around 1469 thanks to Ferdinand and Isabella, who unified the country and thought, hey, let's force everyone to convert to Catholicism, and then we can punish, banish, or eliminate those who resist. Fun times. That continued for centuries. But why limit such a great idea to one country? Portuguese King João III, reigning from 1521 to 1557, thought he'd get in on the action too. He turned Portugal into a colonial juggernaut, but not in a good way. João III spread Portuguese influence all over, setting up exploitative colonies in Brazil, India, and Southeast Asia. And if launching the Atlantic slave trade wasn't enough, he also loved forcing Catholicism on people. He was a busy king. In 1536, thousands of forcibly converted Jews were booted out of Spain and found themselves in Portugal, where things were not any better. João III appointed the first Grand Inquisitor, Diogo da Silva, because every king needs a Grand Inquisitor. In 1540, they held their first trial, calling them auto de fés, Portuguese for acts of faith. Cute, huh? These were basically public humiliation rituals where anyone accused of not being a true Catholic or dabbling in witchcraft, sorcery, or anything else the officials didn't like had to apologize or face some creative punishment. The accused got to wear special outfits to indicate their fate. There were 3 types of outfits, each spelling out a punishment. A samarra with dragons, devils, and flames meant you might be set on fire. A fuego revolto with downward-facing flames meant you'd be asphyxiated instead. But if you had a red cross on your shirt, you could exhale. You were a San Benito, which meant you'd only have to do penance and avoid the grisly fate of the others. How merciful. Eventually, the Portuguese got bored of tormenting people at home and exported their Inquisition to their colonies. Brazil and Goa, India were next on the list. In Goa, Hindus and Muslims were converted en masse because their worship was seen as idolatry. This forced Catholicism continued until 1812, and by the end of the 17th century, Goa's population of 250,000 was whittled down to less than 20,000 practicing Hindus or Muslims. Much of what happened during the Portuguese Inquisition is a mystery. Things were done in secret, documents were destroyed, or later administrations decided to sweep everything under the rug. And then there was a dictator, Antonio de Oliveira Salazar, who ruled from 1932 to 1968 and made sure any hints of Portuguese misdeeds were thoroughly suppressed. Nothing like a good cover-up to keep history looking squeaky clean. Inquisitions of other religions were a thing even before the Spanish Inquisition decided to become a global sensation. Jewish people in Europe between the 13th and 16th centuries had front-row seats to all kinds of persecution. In 1290, King Edward I issued the Edict of Expulsion, essentially telling the entire Jewish population of England, thanks for playing, but Christianity's our new favorite, so you gotta go. This edict stuck around for a casual 350 years. Those who thought Spain might be more welcoming soon found out that after the bubonic plague hit the Iberian Peninsula in 1348, Catholics decided the plague was the devil's work, and clearly assigned to cleanse Spain of non-Catholic influences. Naturally, Jewish people were the scapegoats. Things really ramped up with forced conversion starting in the late 14th century. Jews who converted to Catholicism were called conversos. Many of them did a great job of pretending, saying they had accepted Jesus while still practicing their Jewish faith behind closed doors. These undercover Jews were called crypto-Jews, and the Inquisition officials were definitely not fans of their secret double lives. On top of that, once these conversos claimed to be Catholics, they could suddenly participate in the social and political scenes, much to the dismay of the original Catholics, the OCs, who loved a good anti-Semitic grumble. This led to a delightful series of pogroms across Spain in 1391, also known as the Butchering of 1391. This cheerful wave of anti-Semitism led to widespread violence against Jews in different Spanish cities. Many were forced to convert, others met more permanent solutions. Spain, which at one time had one of the largest Jewish populations in Europe, saw its numbers drop dramatically. And it only got better. In 1492, 200,000 Jews were expelled from Spain. Now, many of them fled to Portugal, where they really enjoyed the familiar routine of forced conversions, punishments, executions, or exiles. Those who fled to the Americas found that the Inquisition had packed its bags and followed them across the ocean. Muslims had their own version of this fun. Muslims under Catholic rule were called mudajars, and those who converted were known as Moriscos. Now, like the conversos, many Moriscos didn't really convert, but kept practicing their Muslim faith in secret as crypto-Muslims. During the 1500s, Muslims in Spain faced increasing levels of persecution. In 1567, King Edward issued a decree banning all forms of Morisco identity, including their dress, their literature, and cultural practices. They even had to leave their doors open on Fridays, the Muslim equivalent of Catholic Sundays, and ditch their Moorish names. By the early 1600s, some 300,000 Moriscos were expelled from Spain, many finding refuge in northern Africa. So if you thought your last move was rough, imagine trying to keep your faith alive while everyone around you is busy inventing ways to stomp it out. And let's not forget about the rest of Europe, where inquisitions were basically the medieval version of a traveling circus. During the 16th and 17th centuries, inquisitions popped up all over the continent, with Rome being a particular hotspot. The Roman Inquisition kicked off in 1542 and had the special distinction of being explicitly condoned by the Pope himself. In 1588, Pope Sixtus V, who apparently had a thing for counting backwards, created the Aeterni Dei, a constitution that recognized the Catholic Church. Part of this reorganization included the creation of the Supreme Congregation of the Roman and Universal Inquisition. Sure, the name was a mouthful, but the mission was simple: stamp out heresy wherever it dared to rear its head. This department had a great time persecuting some of the most groundbreaking scientists in human history, including Galileo and Copernicus. And here's the kicker: the Roman Inquisition has never technically ended. The Supreme Congregation of the Roman and Universal Inquisition has been rebranded multiple times and still exists today as the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith. While they stopped burning people at the stake for heresy, how progressive of them, they're still in the business of making decisions about Catholic doctrine. So next time you think about challenging the status quo, just remember there's a centuries-old department with a fancy name ready to put you back in your place. One of the main reasons for the Spanish Inquisition was the mind-blowing diversity of the Iberian Peninsula during the Middle Ages. After the fall of the Roman Empire, what's now Spain, Portugal, and parts of France were ruled by the Visigoths, who migrated from the Balkans and brought their unique blend of medieval charm. But then, in 711, the Umayyad Caliphate, a vast empire stretching from the Arabian Peninsula across North Africa, decided to drop by and conquer the Visigoths, establishing Al-Andalus on the Iberian Peninsula. To Europeans, they would become known as the Moors. While most of Europe was floundering in the so-called Dark Ages, Al-Andalus turned into a cultural hotspot and a center of learning. Science flourished, advances were made in astronomy and medicine and mathematics and many other fields, and Al-Andalus became the intellectual middleman between Catholic and Islamic worlds. For a few centuries, Catholics, Muslims, and Jews coexisted peacefully in Al-Andalus, a utopia of sorts, if you conveniently overlooked the special tax called the jizya that Muslims impose on Catholic and Jews to let them keep practicing their faiths. This tax, unsurprisingly, created a bit of resentment. I mean, who wouldn't love paying extra just to keep their religion? Eventually, this bubbling resentment exploded as the Catholic population started chipping away at Al-Andalus. By 1236, most of the Iberian Peninsula had been reclaimed by the Catholics from the north, who were clearly not fans of the multicultural vibe. And so the stage was set for the Spanish Inquisition to waltz in and ensure that religious diversity was thoroughly squashed. The advancements made during the time of Al-Andalus gave the Spanish Empire in the 1500s the boost it needed to become a global powerhouse. Their naval prowess allowed them to conquer and pillage the Americas like pros. And of course, as they colonized Mexico and South America, they couldn't resist bringing the Inquisition along for the ride. In 1570, the Mexican Inquisition kicked off when the son of the infamous conquistador Hernán Cortés was caught plotting to make the Mexican colony independent from Spain. Apparently, he missed the memo about the family business being all about domination and not independence. In 1736, they built the Palace of the Inquisition in modern-day Mexico City. This deluxe torture palace came complete with trial rooms and punishment chambers, jail cells, and even comfy accommodations for members of the Holy Office of the Inquisition. It was basically the medieval version of an all-inclusive resort, minus the fun. The palace stayed in business until 1821, when Mexico finally got tired of the whole Inquisition thing and gained its independence from Spain. Not to be left out, Colombia also got its very own Palace of the Inquisition in 1770. This charming establishment offered the same services. Interestingly, the New World Inquisitions weren't too interested in the indigenous populations. Oh, don't worry though, the European colonists found plenty of other ways to torment indigenous Americans. The Holy Office of the Inquisition just wasn't into charging them with heresy. Instead, they went after Jews who had fled the European Inquisitions and slaves brought over from Africa. Women, in particular, had the honor of being accused and tried for sorcery and witchcraft throughout the nearly 250-year history of the New World Inquisition. The Spanish Inquisition lasted for what feels like an eternity, nearly 400 years, from 1478 to 1834. Think about this. That's almost 4 centuries of "Are you a heretic?" parties. We have records of about 67,000 trials, but there were definitely more that didn't make it onto the Inquisition's greatest hits album. Here's a fun fact. Studies show that places in Spain with more inquisitorial trials and thus more persecution have lower GDPs. Surprise, surprise, these areas also have lower levels of education and less trust among people. So the moral of the story? The more persecution you have, the less trust you have. The less education you have, the less money you make. Who knew that centuries of paranoia and witch hunts were not good for economic growth?
Nuclear war. There are currently around 13,000 nuclear warheads in existence. If all of them were detonated, an estimated 50–80% of the human population would die either immediately or over time. The survivors would face a hostile environment characterized by nuclear winter, where temperatures drop due to smoke in the atmosphere blocking sunlight. This would lead to catastrophic damage to agriculture and severe food shortages. Additionally, survivors would have to contend with radiation, which would cause severe health issues, including cancer and genetic mutations. The radiation could also contaminate food and water supplies, further reducing the population over time. Climate change Earth could become uninhabitable if we reach certain tipping points in global warming. Currently, we're at 1.1 degrees C of warming. At 1.5 degrees C, the Greenland ice sheet could start melting, raising sea levels by up to 7 meters over centuries and accelerating regional warming. The exposed ground would heat up faster, increasing melt rates by about 60%. Permafrost would also begin to thaw, releasing CO2 and methane, which would further amplify warming in a feedback loop. This could also release ancient viruses and bacteria, potentially causing new diseases. Between 1.1 degrees Celsius and 2 degrees Celsius, the weakening of the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation could occur, disrupting heat flow from the southern to northern hemisphere and potentially triggering a mini ice age in Europe. At 2 degrees Celsius to 3 degrees Celsius, monsoon systems could be disrupted, affecting around 1 billion people and complicating global food supplies. The Amazon rainforest could also reach a dieback point, turning into savanna, releasing large amounts of CO2, accelerating global warming, and reducing regional rainfall, further impacting agriculture and causing food shortages. Massive asteroid. For an asteroid to cause human extinction, it would need to be around 10 kilometers in diameter, similar to the one that caused the extinction of the dinosaurs. While such an event is highly unlikely, scientists are actively monitoring large asteroids near Earth. Thanks to experiments like the DART mission, which tested a method of asteroid deflection by intentionally crashing a spacecraft into an asteroid at high speed, we have reason to believe that we might be able to prevent a complete catastrophe. Vacuum decay. The hypothesis suggests that our universe might not be perfectly stable. Imagine the universe as a ball resting in a small dent on a hill. Everything is fine as long as the ball stays in the dent. However, if it gets pushed out, it could roll down into a deeper, more stable dent. If this happens, a bubble of true vacuum, which is much more stable than our current state, could form and expand at the speed of light, altering the laws of physics as it spreads. Anything within this bubble would be destroyed because the particles that constitute matter and energy would no longer behave the same way. The unsettling part is that such a bubble could already be expanding and we wouldn't know it, as it travels at the speed of light and is undetectable until it arrives. Gray goo. If a future engineer creates nanobots so small they are invisible without a microscope, designed to replicate using any available material, we could face a catastrophic scenario. Due to exponential growth, even if a single nanobot escaped, it could rapidly multiply without being noticed until it was too late. These nanobots would consume all available materials on Earth to reproduce, resulting in a gray goo scenario where they are nearly impossible to stop. Supervolcanoes. Supervolcano eruptions, though rare, could occur within the next few centuries. Fortunately, scientists can predict them in advance by detecting the pressure buildup. When a supervolcano erupts, it causes massive local damage with explosions, lava flows that destroy everything in their path, and ashfall that can collapse buildings, suffocate living creatures, and contaminate water supplies. The global impact would be severe, primarily due to the ash cloud blocking out the sun, leading to a significant drop in temperatures known as a volcanic winter, cosmic strings. Cosmic strings are peculiar, extremely thin, and incredibly long objects that scientists believe might exist in the universe. They are thought to be remnants from the early stages of the universe, resembling cracks in space. If a cosmic string were to pass through our solar system, its immense energy could slice through space like a knife. The powerful gravitational forces it generates could disrupt the orbits of planets and moons, potentially causing us to be either cut in half or sent adrift into the void. Antibiotic crisis. Currently, antibiotics make it easy to treat infections and perform routine medical procedures. However, over time, bacteria are becoming increasingly resistant to these drugs. The more we use antibiotics, the higher the chance that bacteria will develop stronger resistance. This is why it's important not to use antibiotics without a doctor's supervision. Another contributing factor is the heavy use of antibiotics in agriculture to promote food growth. Some projections suggest that if we don't find new treatments, common infections could once again become life-threatening, potentially causing around 10 million deaths annually. Unfortunately, research into new antibiotics is not well incentivized because it is expensive and not very profitable. New antibiotics often target a small number of bacteria, resulting in low sales, and one-time treatments like vaccines are only needed once, further reducing profitability. Strangelets. Strangelets are particles vastly different from those that make up familiar matter, such as atoms, and are believed to form in the superdense cores of neutron stars. It is hypothesized that when strangelets come into contact with normal matter, they could trigger a chain reaction, converting everything they touch into more strangelets. The concern arises from the possibility that neutron stars might eject these strangelets after a collision, potentially allowing them to reach Earth, though this scenario is highly unlikely. Gamma-ray burst. Gamma-ray bursts are extremely powerful and bright flashes of high-energy light, second only to the Big Bang in terms of energy. These bursts can be triggered by events such as exploding stars or merging neutron stars. If a gamma-ray burst were to hit Earth, it could destroy the ozone layer, leaving us exposed to harmful UV rays and potentially ending life on our planet. However, this scenario is quite unlikely since one of the focused beams would need to be directed precisely at Earth, and the burst would need to occur within our galaxy. Technological stagnation. If humanity reaches a point where our exponential technological progress is halted, either due to a lack of resources for advanced technologies or physical limitations, our chances of colonizing other galaxies would be thwarted, making our extinction from other causes more likely. Additionally, resource scarcity could become a significant issue. Without advancements in agriculture and water management, we might face widespread starvation and resource conflicts. A new disease could spread uncontrollably without new medical technologies, potentially killing a large portion of the population. Moreover, without innovations in anti-climate change technology, the world could become uninhabitable. Dark forest hypothesis. The dark forest hypothesis suggests that we haven't made contact with other alien species because they are intentionally keeping silent to ensure their survival. According to this hypothesis, if aliens possess the technology to reach out to us, they likely also have the capability to destroy us, possibly through means like genetically engineered viruses or star-based laser weapons. Even if these extraterrestrial beings are benevolent, they might view us as insignificant as ants exploiting Earth's resources without concern. Alternatively, they might see us as a potential future threat and decide to eliminate us preemptively. Technological singularity. Technological singularity refers to the point when AI can self-replicate and create increasingly smarter versions of itself at an uncontrollable and unpredictable rate. This rapid growth in intelligence would surpass human capabilities, potentially rendering humans obsolete and demonstrating the power of natural selection. Such a scenario could lead to a conflict over resources, with machines needing them for self-reproduction and humans needing them for survival, resulting in an inevitable war. Even if the AI does not intend to harm us, its actions could still be dangerous. For instance, in solving a problem, AI might alter the environment in ways that make human survival difficult, as it could mathematically prioritize its solutions over human well-being. Genetic engineering. Genetic engineering is a double-edged sword, offering remarkable medical advancements while also equipping humans, who don't always have the best intentions, with the ability to manipulate organisms. It's only a matter of time before the tools and knowledge to create an undetectable, highly contagious and deadly virus become widely accessible. Even unintentional errors in genetic modification or containment could lead to the creation of an animal with no natural predators and a high reproduction rate, causing irreversible damage to the ecosystem. In my opinion, this poses one of the most probable threats of extinction. Transhumanism. In modern times, human biological evolution has slowed down because we adapt to our environment through technology rather than natural changes in our bodies. Technological advancement, however, continues at a much faster pace than biological evolution. This has led to the concept of transhumanism, where technology enhances human abilities beyond natural limits. For example, we could edit our genes to adapt to other planets, potentially creating different human subspecies. One of the most extreme ideas in transhumanism is digital consciousness, which involves uploading human minds into computers or creating a hive mind where multiple people's thoughts and experiences are interconnected, functioning as a superintelligent single entity. This could result in the need for entirely different organisms to gather resources, effectively ending humanity as we know it, but preserving human consciousness in a new form. Heat death. The universe might be heading towards heat death trillions of years from now, a theoretical future where it has expanded so much that it becomes extremely cold and empty. Eventually, there will be no energy differences, resulting in no heat, light, or activity anywhere. Everything will be evenly spread out at a very low temperature, leading to a dark, lifeless universe where nothing new can happen. So even if we survive all other threats, we will still face this ultimate end. However, there is speculation that a new Big Bang might occur in the future, creating another universe.
The Jallianwala Bagh Massacre, also known as the Amritsar Massacre, occurred on April 13, 1919, in Amritsar, Punjab, British India. This tragic event is one of the most infamous episodes of British colonial rule in India. Brigadier General Reginald Dyer ordered his troops to open fire on the unarmed crowd without warning. The firing lasted for about 10 minutes, using 1,650 rounds of ammunition. Official British reports stated 379 deaths and over 1,200 injuries, but Indian sources estimate the death toll to be over 1,000. The massacre was a response to widespread protests against the Rowlatt Act, which extended repressive wartime measures and curtailed civil liberties. The immediate cause of the gathering was the arrest of two prominent Indian leaders, Dr. Saifuddin Kichlu and Dr. Satyapal, who was advocating for Indian independence. The Jallianwala Bagh Massacre remains a poignant symbol of colonial brutality and a turning point in India's struggle for independence. Boer concentration camps, 1899 to 1902. During the Second Boer War, the British Empire established concentration camps in South Africa as part of their military strategy against the Boer guerrilla fighters. These camps became infamous for their horrific conditions and high mortality rates. The Boers employed guerrilla tactics, making it difficult for the British to secure a decisive victory. In response, the British adopted a scorched earth policy, destroying Boer farms and infrastructure to cut off supplies to the guerrillas. Initially set up as refugee camps to house civilians displaced by the war, the camps quickly became tools of internment and control under the command of Lord Kitchener. There were 45 camps for Boer internees and 64 for Black Africans. The camps were overcrowded with poor sanitation and inadequate medical facilities. These conditions led to widespread disease and high mortality rates. Approximately 28,000 Boers, mostly women and children, died in the camps due to unsanitary conditions, disease, and malnutrition. Around 20,000 Black Africans also perished in separate camps, where conditions were equally dire, The Boer War concentration camps are often cited as an early example of the use of internment camps in modern warfare, highlighting the brutal tactics employed by colonial powers. Suppression of the Mau Mau Uprising, 1952 to 1960. The Mau Mau Uprising, also known as the Mau Mau Rebellion or Kenya Emergency, was a significant anti-colonial movement in British Kenya. The British response to the uprising involved severe repression, including mass detentions, torture, and killings. The Mau Mau Uprising began in 1952 as a reaction to the economic and political marginalization of the Kikuyu people and other ethnic groups by British colonial rule. The movement aimed to reclaim land and achieve independence. Between 70,000 and 150,000 Mau Mau suspects were detained without trial in a network of camps. Conditions in these camps were dire, with widespread reports of torture, forced labor, and sexual abuse. Detainees faced systematic torture, including beatings, castration, and rape. Many were subjected to forced labor and lived in appalling conditions, leading to high mortality rates. Estimates of the number of deaths vary widely. Official British sources estimate around 11,000 Mau Mau and other rebels were killed, but some historians, like David Anderson, place the number at over 20,000. Caroline Elkins estimates that between 100,000 and 300,000 Africans are unaccounted for, suggesting the death toll could be much higher. In recent years, survivors of the Mau Mau uprising have sought justice and compensation for the abuses they suffered. In 2013, the British government agreed to a settlement of nearly £20 million for thousands of Kenyans who were tortured during the uprising. Although no formal apology was issued, the suppression of the Mau Mau uprising by British forces involved extensive human rights abuses, including mass detentions, torture, and killings, leaving a lasting impact on Kenya's path to independence and its historical memory. The Partition of India in 1947 was a monumental event that led to the creation of two independent dominions, India and Pakistan. This division was marked by significant violence, mass migrations, and profound socio-political changes. The partition was formalized by the Indian Independence Act, passed by the British Parliament, which led to the end of British rule in India and the creation of two separate nations, India and Pakistan. The partition was driven by the demand for a separate Muslim state, advocated by the All India Muslim League, led by Muhammad Ali Jinnah, and the Indian National Congress's vision of a united India. The partition triggered one of the largest mass migrations in history, with estimates of 14 to 18 million people crossing the newly drawn borders to join their respective religious majorities. The partition was accompanied by unprecedented communal violence. Estimates of the death toll vary widely, ranging from 200,000 to 2 million, with most scholars accepting around 1 million deaths. The partition sowed seeds of enduring hostility and suspicion between India and Pakistan, leading to multiple wars and ongoing conflicts, particularly over the Kashmir region. The hurried and poorly planned partition of India in 1947 resulted in massive violence, the deaths of up to 1 million people, and the displacement of over 10 million, leaving a legacy of trauma and division that continues to affect the region to this day. The Bengal famine of 1943 was a catastrophic event in British India, resulting in the deaths of an estimated 3 to 4 million people. The famine was exacerbated by British colonial policies and wartime exigencies. The famine occurred in the Bengal province of British India, present-day Bangladesh, and West Bengal during World War II, primarily in 1943 to 1944. The famine affected a population of approximately 60.3 million, with an estimated death toll ranging from 2.1 to 3.8 million people due to starvation, disease, and malnutrition. Despite the famine, the British continued to export rice from India to support the war effort in other parts of the empire, including the Middle East and Europe. The financing of military operations led to inflation, making food unaffordable for many Bengalis. A cyclone in October 1942 and subsequent crop diseases reduced the rice yield. but these were not the primary causes of the famine. The famine led to widespread starvation and diseases such as malaria, cholera, and dysentery, which were aggravated by malnutrition and unsanitary conditions. Millions of people were displaced as they migrated in search of food and relief, leading to further social and economic disruption. The Bengal famine of 1943 is considered one of the most devastating famines in modern history and a significant example of the detrimental impact of colonial policies on subject populations. Cyprus internment, 1955 to 1959. During the Cyprus emergency, British forces detained and tortured thousands of Cypriots suspected of being involved in the IOKA, Ethniki Organosis Kyprian Agoniston insurgency. The IOKA was a Greek Cypriot nationalist guerrilla organization that sought to end British colonial rule and achieve enosis, union with Greece. The Cyprus emergency was an ethnic conflict between Greek Cypriots, who largely supported enosis, and Turkish Cypriots, who opposed it and supported partition. The conflict began in April 1955 and ended in March 1959 with the London-Zurich Agreements, which established Cyprus as an independent state. The British established several detention camps across Cyprus to hold suspected IOKA members and sympathizers. These camps were notorious for their harsh conditions and the use of torture. British forces employed various methods of torture, including beatings, waterboarding, flogging, sexual violence, mock executions. In 2012, the British Foreign Office released classified documents revealing admissions of torture and abuse by colonial officials. The legacy of these actions continues to impact the historical memory and relations between the UK and Cyprus. What other topic you want us to cover, please let us know in the comments.
The Catherine Wheel. Have you ever heard of the Catherine Wheel? I like to call it the medieval Wheel of Misfortune. Picture this, a giant wagon wheel, but instead of taking you on a scenic countryside tour, it's about to give you the worst day of your life. Named after St. Catherine of Alexandria, who supposedly broke the wheel just by touching it. This device was the medieval equivalent of saying you've been very bad, and now you're in for some next-level hurt. So how did this wheel work? Well, imagine you're a criminal back in the day. Maybe you stole a loaf of bread or you looked at the king funny. And yes, back then, if you looked at the king funny, depending on the king, that would make you a criminal. But anyway, you're sentenced to the Catherine Wheel. First off, congrats on making it to the big leagues of punishment. They would tie you to this massive wheel, and then, get this, they would start breaking your bones with iron bars or hammers. It's like a twisted game of whack-a-mole. But you're the mole, and that's no bueno. But wait, there's more. After turning you into a human jigsaw puzzle, they would weave your limbs through the wheel spokes, because why not? And then they'd hoist you up for everyone to see. It's the medieval version of a bad review on Yelp, but instead of hurting your business, it's just you, hanging there. And here's the kicker. If by some miracle the wheel of the executioners messed up and you survived, it was considered divine intervention, so you'd get to live. But let's keep it real. The odds were about as good as winning the lottery while getting struck by lightning. The Blood Eagle. So you might be wondering, what in the world is a Blood Eagle? If you're thinking it's a funky new dance move or a medieval birdwatching club, you'd be wronger than treating the 10 Commandments as a list of suggestions. Okay, maybe not that wrong. The Blood Eagle is an ancient execution method. Think of it as extreme yoga, but with fewer moments and a lot more screaming. First, the victim is laid face down on a very uncomfortable Viking massage table. They're tied down tight, tighter than tight. The executioner, who clearly missed his calling as a sushi chef, starts by slicing open the skin on their back. The executioner carefully separates the ribs from the spine, one by one. It's kind of like deboning a fish. The ribs are pulled apart, and the executioner dives in like he's grabbing that last piece of pizza. And then it's time for the grand finale. The lungs. They're pulled apart and arranged to look like wings. Imagine trying to inflate a balloon while it's still in the bag. That's kind of what this looked like. These bloody wings are supposed to be the piece de resistance, as the victim lies there, probably regretting all their life choices. They're experiencing a unique blend of suffocation and excruciating pain. And a pain that no one could ever imagine. And that's the Blood Eagle. Scaphism. Let's explore some Persian justice. Take Judge Sesames, for example. This guy got caught being corrupt, so King Cambyses II decided to turn him into a piece of furniture. The judge was flayed alive. Ouch! And his skin was used to upholster a chair. No, really, that actually happened. Future judges had to sit in this chair as a reminder not to be naughty. Then there's the tale of a eunuch who really ticked off Cyrus the Great's wife. She had him killed not once, not even twice. She had him killed 3 times. First, his eyes were plucked out. He survived that. Then he was flayed, and he was still hanging in there. Finally, they crucified him, and that did it. They called it the triple death. But let's get back to the main event. Mithridates and a punishment known as scaphism. Poor Mithridates accidentally killed Cyrus the Younger with a javelin, and his bad aim earned him the worst death sentence ever. Follow me here. 2 boats nailed together, creating a floating coffin with holes for his head, holes for his hands, and holes for his feet to stick out. Then they force-fed him milk and honey, which kind of sounds nice at first, but then the sun baked him, and the honey attracted swarms of flies. And as if that wasn't enough, they kept stuffing him with milk and honey until he, well, had some major bowel movements. All that excrement attracted even more creepy crawlies, which began to feast on his flesh. Mithridates endured this buggy buffet for 17 days, being slowly eaten alive by insects. He finally died, but not before probably wishing he'd taken up a safer hobby than javelin throwing. There's also the story from 363 AD about a bishop named Marcus who got in trouble with Roman Emperor Julian. Marcus destroyed a pagan temple, so Julian hung him in a basket to be eaten by insects. Not as elaborate as scaphism, but just as deadly. Now, some historians argue that Plutarch, the guy who wrote about scaphism, might have been exaggerating to make the Persians look bad. Was it fake news? Well, we may never know. But one thing we do know, if you were in ancient Persia, you definitely didn't want to end up on their bad side. The guillotine. The guillotine is most famous for its work during the French Revolution. This terrifying contraption was the go-to method for executing both innocent and guilty citizens. Trials were rare, but beheadings were plentiful. Now, beheading isn't a new concept. Ancient Greeks and Romans were chopping heads long before the French made it trendy. Back then, beheading was an honorable death reserved for nobles. Common folks like me and you, we got the axe, while the really important people got the sword. Regardless, heads did roll. In Japan, samurai practiced seppuku, a ritual beheading from the 15th to the 19th century. In medieval England, beheading was still all the rage for rival rulers and traitors, though traitors had a bit more drama. They were dragged, hung, disemboweled, and then beheaded. Sometimes they even got torn apart by horses. Don't ask. Before the guillotine, Germany had the plank and England had the Halifax gibbet, both designed for swift beheadings. But then came France with the ultimate cutting-edge technology, the guillotine. Dr. Joseph Ignace Guillotin, a Parisian anatomy professor and politician, came up with the idea in 1789. He wanted equality in death as much as in life. His argument? If nobles get quick, painless deaths, so should common criminals. His solution was a beheading machine for all. His thing was, the mechanism falls like lightning, the head flies off, the blood spurts, and the man no longer exists. Sounds simple enough, right? Though Dr. Guillotin had the idea, it was Antoine Louis who built the first guillotine. After some trial and error with animals and human corpses, he perfected the machine. Initially called the Louisette, it was eventually named after Dr. Guillotin, but he really didn't care for that much. The guillotine was a straightforward design, 2 wooden beams, a crossbeam at the top, and a heavy sharp blade. The first victim in 1792 was a guy named Nicolas Jacques Pelletier. He was a criminal, and he was paraded before an eager crowd. Imagine you're in the crowd, seeing this 14-foot wooden monster for the first time. The executioner pulls the lever, the blade drops, and Pelletier's head falls into a basket. And then the crowd goes wild. The guillotine quickly became the favorite form of execution in France. People had toy guillotines, poets sang its praises, and vendors sold souvenirs at executions. People were buying t-shirts that said, "I lost my head in France." You could even get a seat at a nearby restaurant called Cabaret de la Guillotine. Some folks attended executions every day, knitting between beheadings. Executioners became celebrities. They got lots of love for their speed and precision. At one point, rumors were spreading that severed heads remained conscious. In 1793, an executioner's assistant slapped the face of Charlotte Corday's decapitated head, and people swore they saw it blush. Spoiler alert, it didn't. Modern experiments showed brain activity might continue for a few seconds after decapitation, but there are no talking heads. The guillotine's popularity kind of slowed down some in the 20th century, but saw a brief resurgence during the Nazi regime. After World War II, it was still used in France until 1977. The last guillotine execution was in 1977 on a guy named Hanabi Danjoubi. for murder. He was a pimp. France abolished capital punishment in 1981. Now, Dr. Guillotine was shook up by how his idea was used and tried to disassociate its name from the machine, but it was too late. The guillotine had become a symbol of death and terror. So, there you have it, the guillotine, a machine that struck fear, awe, and excitement into the hearts of people during and after the French Revolution. Now remember, if you ever find yourself on the wrong end of a guillotine, you might have 4 or 5 seconds to make a funny face before you lose consciousness. If you've lost your head over this video, check out more awesome videos from your favorite YouTube channel.
What if you woke up one morning, everything was fine? You felt good. Great, Ethan. Amazing, turns out. You manifested superpowers overnight. The question is, what would you want that superpower to be? Well, I have the answer already. Hyperthymesia, super memory. Imagine if you could remember every single day of your life in perfect detail. Not just the major events, but the little things too. Like what you had for breakfast on April 3rd, 2005, or the exact outfit you wore to that one friend's party 10 years ago. Sounds like a superpower, right? Well, for a few special people, this is their reality. Welcome to the fascinating world of hyperthymesia, also known as highly superior autobiographical memory, HSAM. Let's take a moment to meet one of the real-life superheroes of memory, actress Marilu Henner. You might remember her from the classic TV show Taxi, but she remembers everything, literally everything. Seriously, if you ever need to know what day of the week September 14th, 1982 fell on, Marilu's your gal. Picture this. You're at a party, and someone mentions a random date, say June 23rd, 1998. While most of us would shrug and say, no idea, Marilu would light up and say, oh, that was a Tuesday. I wore a red dress with polka dots, had pancakes for breakfast, and spilled coffee on my boss's desk. Yes, it's that specific. Imagine if she were your friend. No way to get away with forgetting a birthday. Marilu's memory isn't just a party trick. She's been on shows like 60 Minutes demonstrating her incredible recall powers. Just picture it, a panel of experts grilling her about random dates from her past. Marilu, what happened on October 12, 1983? Without missing a beat, she recounts the day's events, including what she wore, what she ate, and probably even the weather. It's like having a human time machine, except without the risk of altering the space-time continuum. But let's be real for a second. Hyperthymesia isn't all fun and games. While it sounds awesome to remember every little detail, think about the awkward moments you'd rather forget. That embarrassing thing you did in high school? Yep, it's there forever. The time you tripped in front of your crush? Crystal clear. Marilu and others like her can't just let these moments fade into obscurity. They're stuck on replay. Next is high bone density. Imagine having bones so strong that you'd make Superman jealous. We're talking about bones that are practically unbreakable, thanks to a genetic mutation. This condition, caused by mutations in the LRP5 gene, gives some lucky folks bones with incredible density and strength. But, as with all superpowers, there's a catch. Let's start with the good stuff. These individuals have bones so dense they could probably walk away from a car crash with just a shrug and a "did someone feel a breeze?" Their x-rays must look like solid marble statues. But here's where the comedy kicks in. While having super dense bones sounds fantastic, it's not all sunshine and rainbows, especially when it comes to swimming. Imagine trying to float with bones that are denser than lead. It's like having a built-in anchor. Most people can lounge in a pool, enjoying the water. These folks, they're struggling to stay afloat like they've got pockets full of rocks. So, while most of us are trying to avoid breaking a bone from a simple fall, these high bone density heroes are strutting around with unbreakable skeletons. But, as they say, every superpower has its downside. For these folks, it's the challenge of floating in water without looking like they're auditioning for the Titanic sequel. Tetrachromacy, incredible vision. Imagine being able to see colors that others can't even dream of. No, this isn't the plot of a sci-fi movie. It's a real-life superpower known as tetrachromacy. Most humans have 3 types of cone cells in their eyes, giving them the ability to see around 1 million different colors. But tetrachromats? They've got 4 types of cones, allowing them to see a staggering 100 million color variations. Picture this. Where you see a simple blue sky, a tetrachromat might see dozens of different blues, each one unique. It's like having the latest 4K TV while everyone else is still watching in standard definition. Interestingly, this supervision is almost exclusively found in women. Up to 12% of women worldwide might be tetrachromats. Men, sorry to break it to you, but this one's not for you. It's believed that tetrachromatic women are often the daughters of men with anomalous trichromacy, a type of color blindness. So, if your dad struggles to tell red from green, congratulations. You might just have inherited the vision of a superhero. While having supervision sounds amazing, it must have its quirks. Imagine trying to explain to your friends why you need a dozen different shades of white paint for your living room. No, this one's eggshell and this one's ivory. They're completely different. Insensitivity to pain. Imagine being a superhero who can't feel pain. Sounds pretty awesome, right? No more stubbing your toe and hopping around like a maniac or wincing when you accidentally bite your tongue. Welcome to the world of congenital insensitivity to pain, CIP, also known as congenital analgesia. But before you start thinking it's all fun and games, let's dive into why this rare condition is more like a double-edged sword, or a sword you don't realize you're holding the wrong way. First off, let's talk about the perks. People with CIP don't have to worry about headaches, backaches, or any other aches that most of us gripe about daily. Imagine watching a horror movie where everyone is freaking out, and you're just chilling because even if a monster did jump out and bite you, you wouldn't feel a thing. Pretty cool, huh? But hold on. Here comes the twist. Pain is like your body's alarm system, warning you when something is wrong. Without it, you might not notice that you've just put your hand on a hot stove, sliced your finger while cutting veggies, or walked around all day with a broken bone. While everyone else is running for bandages, you're just standing there, oblivious to the chaos. Because they don't feel pain, people with CIP have to be extra careful. They can get hurt and not even know it, leading to infections or other complications. It's like living in a video game where you can't see your health bar and you only realize you're low on health when things start flashing red. Except, there's no flashing red in real life. Polymorphia is an uncommon congenital anomaly where an individual is born with more limbs than usual. Typically, these additional limbs are underdeveloped or malformed and serve no practical function. However, a unique case emerged from India involving a boy named Deepu Pwan. Born with a single head, 4 arms, and 4 legs, his limbs were unusually well formed and seemed to be fully functional. This extraordinary condition led many to envision the advantages of having multiple limbs, such as an unmatched prowess at playing foosball with 4 hands or dominating at Dance Dance Revolution with 4 legs. In Hindu mythology, deities frequently possess multiple limbs, symbolizing their immense power and capabilities. Consequently, when word spread about the Octo Boy, pilgrims from across India began to visit him, venerating him as a divine incarnation. However, scientific investigation revealed that the additional limbs were the result of a parasitic twin that had not fully developed in the womb and had become fused with him. Let's start with the Roman Empire. You think about it a lot, right? Or at least now you are. Maybe you want to wear a toga and watch Caesar invent that famous salad. Wait, he didn't invent the salad? Then why is it named after him? Never mind, we're here to talk about laws. Buckle up for some historical hilarity. First things first, let's talk fashion. Planning a trip to ancient Rome? Avoid purple like the plague. Are you an emperor? No. Then that shade is a major no-go. Wearing purple back then was like walking around with a "I'm super rich and powerful" sign. It was so expensive that only the top dogs, like emperors, could wear it. Doesn't matter if purple is your color or if it makes your eyes sparkle, unless you want to be the ancient Roman version of a fashion outlaw. Leave the purple at home. Attention, female time travelers. If you find yourself at a funeral in ancient Rome, hold those tears. Crying at funerals was actually illegal for women back then. Why such a heartless law? To put a stop to the booming business of professional mourners, of course. Here's the deal. Roman funerals started with a parade of mourners weeping and wailing down the street. The bigger the sob fest, the more loved the deceased was thought to be. Enterprising ladies saw a business opportunity and started hiring themselves out as professional criers, making a dramatic scene over someone they didn't even know. To curb this over-the-top tear fest, the Romans banned women from crying at funerals. So, if you find yourself in ancient Rome, keep your eyes dry and your emotions in check, unless you want to get busted for illegal bawling. Picture this. You're strolling through the streets of ancient Rome, loving the breeze in your new, definitely not purple toga. Suddenly, you notice a storm brewing. Uh-oh. The air gets all crackly, and you know lightning is about to strike. Sure enough, a flash blinds you as a bolt zaps a guy right next to you, frying him on the spot. Yikes, poor guy, right? Better give him a proper burial. Wrong! Thanks to the law of Numa Pompilius, anyone struck by lightning is off limits for burial. In ancient Rome, this wasn't just a freak accident. It was a big, divine screw you from Jupiter, the god of thunder. Burying that body, that's like swiping a sacrifice from Jupiter himself. Do it anyway, and you might find yourself as the next sacrifice. They could move the body out of the way if it was a trip hazard, but only if they didn't lift it above their knees. Lifting it higher? That's a crime too. So, now that you're all set for any trips to ancient Rome, let's zap over to another exciting time and place. Next stop, Imperial China. The main advice here? Be neat, clean, and respectful, or you might end up in serious legal hot water. During the Shang Dynasty, 1600–1046 BCE, littering was a huge no-no. And no, we're not talking about a fine or community service. If you got caught tossing trash on the road, you could kiss your hand goodbye. Literally. That's right, the punishment for littering was getting your hand chopped off. So, if you're visiting Imperial China, keep those streets clean unless you want to be known as One-Handed Wonder. Planning to go fishing during the Tang Dynasty? Be extra careful. The word for carp sounded the same as the Tang Emperor's last name, so these fish got special treatment. According to the Miscellany of Yueyang, a collection of records about legends and customs from that time, if you caught a carp, you had to release it immediately and absolutely could not eat it. Selling carp? That would get you 60 flogs. So, if you're heading back to the Tang Dynasty for some fishing, make sure you can identify your catch like a pro. Next stop, the Yuan Dynasty, where all fish were fair game. But don't mess with chickens. According to historian Yang Yu, during Emperor Renzong's reign, people in the capital were forbidden from holding chickens upside down. Anyone caught defying this oddly specific law could be jailed. Why? Because the emperor's zodiac sign was the rooster, and apparently he didn't appreciate his feathery counterparts getting flipped. So, to be safe, treat all birds and fish with respect during your travels, and remember, no chicken gymnastics allowed. In ancient Egypt, there's one animal you absolutely must treat like royalty: the cat. Cats were sacred, and harming one could get you the death penalty. Harsh? Maybe, but considering how adorable cats are, it seems pretty fair. So, if you're heading to ancient Egypt, remember, treat every kitty like the divine furball it is, or you might just be the one taking a cat nap. Permanently. Let's fast forward to jolly old England. It's time to get medieval. Want to travel to the Middle Ages and live your own Knight's Tale? Sounds epic, but beware of the many weird laws. Step out of line in the wrong place at the wrong time, and it's off with your head. So, brush up on your manners and medieval law, or you might find yourself in a real-life Game of Thrones, minus the dragons. When you arrive in medieval England, you'll need to find food. But be careful. Don't go hunting all willy-nilly. In 1198, a law made hunting deer in the royal forest illegal. Caught with venison there? You'd face blinding and castration. Throughout the medieval era, the church had a lot of power and loved using it in creative ways. One of their favorite rules was telling married couples when they could and couldn't have sex. Thursdays and Fridays were off limits as prep days for Holy Communion, and Sundays were a no-go too. Add to that the entirety of Lent, the days before Christmas, and the Feast of Pentecost. Now let's hop over to the good old US of A and check out the accidental historical crimes you might stumble into. Depending on the state, you'll find some seriously wacky laws that are no longer around today but could be a real headache if you're time traveling. So, watch your step. You might end up in hot water for something completely unexpected. First, let's talk about drinking. It's a popular pastime. But from 1920 to 1933, America was deep in prohibition, banning the manufacture, sale, and consumption of alcohol. We all know about prohibition, but it wasn't the only booze-related legal crackdown in American history. Take Kentucky, for instance. It was once illegal to buy alcohol while the polls were open for general elections or primaries. No election day drinking. This law was a reaction to political parties in pre-prohibition America, bribing voters with free booze. Kentucky finally overturned this law in 2013, so modern voters can now toast to their civic duty. And just when you thought alcohol laws couldn't get weirder, let's talk temperature. Surely no one would mandate that, right? Wrong! Welcome to the wild world of historical drinking laws. In Mississippi, it was once illegal to sell cold beer in a store. You could sell it at room temperature, but chilling it was a no-no. The idea was to prevent drunk driving by making beer drinkers wait until they got home to refrigerate their brew before cracking it open. This law finally got the boot in 2013. Sure, those laws were quirky, but hey, at least we're not in the Middle Ages anymore. No more religiously motivated laws restricting our fun, right? What's that? Oh, never mind. Frostbite testing. Test subjects were taken outside in freezing weather and doused with water until their limbs froze. The frozen limbs were then subjected to different methods of rewarming to study the effects of frostbite treatment. These methods included dousing the limb with hot water, holding the limb close to an open fire, leaving the subject untreated overnight. These methods were part of the cruel experiments conducted by Unit 731, where captives' limbs were submerged in ice water until they froze, after which these rewarming techniques were applied to study the effects. Pathogen testing. In the pathogen testing conducted by Unit 731, subjects were deliberately infected with a variety of deadly diseases to study their effects on the human body. The specific diseases used in these experiments included bubonic plague, typhoid fever, yellow fever, typhus, chicken pox, and list goes on. These experiments were part of Unit 731's broader research into biological warfare and were conducted without regard for the well-being or consent of the subjects, leading to many deaths and severe illnesses. Vivisection. In the vivisection experiments conducted by Unit 731, individuals were dissected alive without anesthesia. The purpose was to study the effects of diseases on the human body and to observe the natural progression of these diseases, as well as the effects of various injuries on living organs. These inhumane procedures often resulted in extreme suffering and death for the subjects, which involved performing surgical operations on living organisms without anesthesia for experimental purposes, led to immense suffering, mutilation, and death for the subjects. Weapon testing. In the weapon testing experiments conducted by Unit 731, victims were tied to stakes and used as live targets to test the effectiveness of various biological and chemical weapons, including plague bombs, chemical weapons, grenades, and flamethrowers. The specific biological and chemical weapons tested on live targets by Unit 731 included biological weapons like anthrax, plague, Yersinia pestis, cholera, typhoid, botulinum toxin, smallpox, tetrodotoxin, and chemical weapons included cyanide, mustard gas, sulfur mustard, phosgene, lewisite, hydrogen, cyanide, VX, gas, sarin, gas. High-pressure chamber tests. In the high-pressure chamber tests conducted by Unit 731, subjects were placed in large pressure chambers where the pressure was gradually increased until their bodies could no longer withstand the intense conditions, often leading to death. These experiments were designed to study the effects of extreme pressure on the human body, contributing to the understanding of how high-pressure environments could impact human physiology. This research was intended to understand the limits of human endurance and the potential impact of high-pressure environments, which could be relevant in military scenarios such as deep-sea or high-altitude operations. Seawater injections. In the seawater injection experiments conducted by Unit 731, researchers injected prisoners with seawater to investigate its viability as a substitute for saline solution. This was done under the premise of finding an alternative for medical saline in situations where it might be scarce. However, these injections frequently led to infections, severe health complications, and the death of the subjects. The body's reaction to the injection of seawater, which is not sterile and has a different salinity compared to human blood, could lead to shock, organ failure, and ultimately death due to the body's inability to cope with the imbalance. Temperature tests. In the temperature tests conducted by Unit 731, subjects were exposed to extreme conditions of both heat and cold to study the human body's response to temperature variations. This involved submerging limbs in ice water to induce frostbite and using high temperatures to observe the effects of heat on the human physiology. These experiments were part of a broader series of brutal tests aimed at understanding how environmental factors affect human endurance and survival. These experiments aimed to gather data on how temperature extremes could affect soldiers' survivability and performance in various environmental conditions. Syphilis and gonorrhea. Testing. In the syphilis and gonorrhea testing conducted by Unit 731, individuals were deliberately infected with these sexually transmitted diseases. The purpose was to study the progression and potential treatments of syphilis and gonorrhea, often conducted without the subject's consent or knowledge. These unethical experiments aimed to understand the effects of these diseases on the human body, but resulted in significant suffering and long-term health consequences for the victims. These experiments, which took place between 1946 and 1948, involved the deliberate infection of over 1,300 individuals with sexually transmitted diseases, including syphilis and gonorrhea, without their consent. The subjects included prisoners, soldiers, psychiatric patients, and sex workers. Crush syndrome. In the crush syndrome experiments conducted by Unit 731, heavy objects were deliberately dropped on bound victims to study crush injuries. This was intended to simulate the effects of debris falling on people during bombings. The primary goal was to understand the physiological responses and potential survival strategies under such extreme conditions, often resulting in severe injuries or death for the subjects involved. The Black Death. The Black Death, which occurred from 1347 to 1351, is one of the deadliest pandemics in human history. It was caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, which was transmitted to humans through the bites of fleas that had previously fed on infected rodents. This pandemic had a catastrophic impact, claiming approximately 200 million lives across Europe, Asia, and Africa. The Black Death led to significant social, economic, and cultural changes, as it wiped out a substantial portion of the population in the affected regions, disrupting entire societies and economies. The Spanish flu. The Spanish flu pandemic of 1918-1919, caused by the H1N1 influenza virus, was one of the most severe global pandemics in history. It infected about one-third of the world's population, approximately 500 million people, and resulted in the deaths of around 50 million individuals worldwide. The United States was significantly impacted, with about 675,000 deaths. The pandemic spread rapidly, facilitated by troop movements during World War I and the global transportation network. Despite its name, the Spanish flu likely originated in the United States or Europe, not Spain. Spain was just one of the few countries that reported on the flu freely, as it was neutral during World War I and did not impose wartime censorship. The virus was particularly deadly because it caused a cytokine storm, which led to severe respiratory issues and death, often within days of symptoms appearing. The pandemic occurred in waves, with the second wave being the most lethal. There were no effective vaccines or antiviral drugs at the time, which compounded the pandemic's severity. HIV/AIDS, first identified in the early 1980s in Central Africa, has led to approximately 36 million deaths worldwide since its discovery. The disease is caused by the human immunodeficiency virus, HIV, which attacks the immune system and, if untreated, leads to acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, AIDS. Despite significant medical advancements and the development of antiretroviral therapy to manage the disease, the HIV/AIDS pandemic continues to be a major global health issue, affecting millions of people around the world. The Plague of Justinian. The Plague of Justinian, which occurred between 541 and 543 AD, was a devastating pandemic caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, the same pathogen responsible for the Black Death centuries later. Originating in Egypt, the plague spread rapidly throughout the Byzantine Empire and the surrounding Mediterranean ports. It is estimated to have caused between 30 to 50 million deaths, significantly impacting the population of the Byzantine Empire. This pandemic severely weakened the empire, affecting its economy and military capabilities, and marked one of the first recorded instances of bubonic plague in history. The 7 cholera pandemics. The 7 cholera pandemics, caused by the bacterium Vibrio cholerae, originated in India and have occurred from 1817 to the present. These pandemics have collectively resulted in approximately 40 million deaths worldwide. Cholera is characterized by severe diarrhea and dehydration. Despite advancements in public health and sanitation, cholera continues to cause outbreaks, particularly in regions with inadequate access to clean water and sanitation facilities. The persistence of cholera highlights the ongoing challenge of ensuring global water safety and public health. The Asian flu pandemic. The Asian flu pandemic of 1957-1958, caused by the influenza A H2N2 virus, originated in China. This pandemic resulted in over 1 million deaths worldwide. The virus, a reassortant strain combining avian and human influenza viruses, spread rapidly across the globe, affecting populations in various countries with significant mortality rates. The symptoms of the Asian flu pandemic, caused by the influenza A H2N2 virus, included fever, cough, sore throat, runny nose, muscle pain, headache, fatigue, chills, prostration. The Hong Kong flu pandemic. The Hong Kong flu pandemic of 1968, caused by the influenza A H3N2 virus, originated in China and resulted in an estimated 1 to 4 million deaths globally. This pandemic was characterized by symptoms typical of influenza, including fever, cough, and sore throat, and lasted from 1968 to 1969. The virus was a result of antigenic shift, where genes from multiple subtypes reassorted to form a new virus, specifically descending from the H2N2 strain responsible for the 1957 Asian flu pandemic 12. The rapid global spread of the Hong Kong flu was facilitated by modern transportation and the movement of people, including military personnel. Despite its high infection rate, the case fatality ratio was relatively low, below 0.5%, categorizing it as a Category 2 pandemic on the Pandemic Severity Index. The Antonine Plague. The Antonine Plague, which occurred between 165 and 180 AD, significantly impacted the Roman Empire, resulting in the deaths of approximately 5 million people. This epidemic is believed to have been caused by either the variola virus, which causes smallpox, or by the measles virus. The plague was characterized by symptoms such as fevers, skin sores, diarrhea, and sore throats. The disease was brought to Rome by armies returning from campaigns in Western Asia, where they likely encountered the pathogen. The Roman population, having no prior exposure to these viruses, had no immunity, leading to widespread and devastating outbreaks. Despite the passage of centuries, the exact cause of the Antonine Plague remains a subject of debate among historians and scientists. While most evidence points towards smallpox or measles as the likely pathogens, the descriptions from that era, including those by the physician Galen, do not provide a definitive diagnosis. The Ebola pandemic. The 2014-2016 Ebola outbreak, originating in West Africa, specifically in Guinea, was caused by the Ebola virus, EBOV, and resulted in approximately 11,225 deaths. This outbreak was the largest and most complex Ebola outbreak since the virus was first discovered in 1976, with more cases and deaths than all other known Ebola outbreaks combined. The outbreak began in December 2013 and spread to several countries, including Sierra Leone and Liberia, which, along with Guinea, were the most affected.
Punji sticks. Punji sticks were essentially sharpened bamboo stakes, sometimes coated with substances to cause infections, concealed in pits or under foliage. They were one of the simplest yet most effective traps, causing severe injuries to soldiers who stepped on them. The simplicity of their design, coupled with their lethal effectiveness, made them a notorious aspect of guerrilla warfare during the Vietnam War. The punji sticks were used extensively by the Viet Cong to slow down, injure, or kill enemy soldiers, significantly impacting the mobility and effectiveness of opposing forces. Bouncing Betty mines. These mines were designed to jump up to waist height before detonating, dispersing shrapnel in a lethal radius. Their design maximized injury potential, often resulting in severe or fatal wounds to multiple soldiers with a single detonation. Bounding mines, such as the US M16 mine and the German S mine from World War II, are triggered by pressure, but include a small propelling charge that launches the mine body into the air. Once airborne, typically about 3 to 4 feet off the ground, the main charge explodes, projecting shrapnel at high velocity across a lethal radius. These mines are particularly dangerous because they combine the effects of a blast mine with the widespread dispersal of fragmentation, making them effective against personnel in open areas. Booby-trapped grenades. Booby-trapped grenade, or grenade in a can. This type of booby trap involved grenades with their safety pins removed, placed inside cans or similar containers along pathways or trails. The grenades were rigged to a tripwire, so when the wire was disturbed or triggered by someone passing by, it would pull the grenade out of the can, causing it to detonate almost immediately. This trap was designed to surprise and inflict casualties on enemy troops, utilizing the element of surprise and the lethal effectiveness of the grenade's explosion. Cartridge traps, toe poppers. Cartridge traps, or toe poppers. These traps were ingeniously simple, yet effective devices used extensively during the Vietnam War by the Viet Cong to inflict injuries on enemy soldiers. The basic construction of these traps involved a cartridge, typically from small arms ammunition, set into a piece of bamboo or a similar tube-like structure. A nail was positioned at the bottom of this setup to act as a firing pin. When a soldier stepped on the trap, the pressure exerted would drive the cartridge down onto the nail, which then struck the primer of the cartridge. This action caused the cartridge to fire, shooting the bullet upwards through the foot or leg of the individual who triggered it. The design was such that it was typically camouflaged and placed along paths or in areas where soldiers were likely to stay. A source of anxiety for troops operating in areas known to be booby-trapped. Snake pits. Snake pits were among the array of booby traps utilized during the Vietnam War, serving both as physical deterrents and psychological weapons. These traps consisted of pits or holes that were either naturally occurring or deliberately dug, then filled with venomous snakes. They were strategically placed in locations such as the extensive network of Viet Cong tunnels or camouflaged within the dense jungle terrain. The primary intent behind the use of snake pits was to inflict harm on enemy soldiers through venomous bites, posing a direct threat to their physical well-being. The unpredictability of encountering a snake pit in any given area heightened the sense of caution needed to navigate the terrain, potentially slowing down troop movements and disrupting operations. Bamboo whip. The trap described is known as the bamboo whip. This booby trap consisted of a long bamboo pole fitted with sharp spikes. The pole was pulled back into an arc and held in place by a catch connected to a tripwire. When the tripwire was triggered, the catch would release, causing the bamboo pole to whip forward at high speed, impaling anyone in its path with the spikes. This trap was particularly effective due to its combination of surprise and lethal injury, making it one of the feared booby traps used during the Vietnam War. The mace. The mace trap used during the Vietnam War was indeed similar to medieval weapons in its design and function. It consisted of a large spiked ball, often made of metal or wood, which was suspended from a tree or other structure. The trap was rigged with a tripwire, and when this wire was triggered by an unsuspecting soldier, the mace would swing down forcefully. The spikes on the ball would cause severe injuries or even death to anyone caught in its path. This trap was one of many ingenious yet deadly booby traps employed by the Viet Cong to inflict maximum casualties on enemy troops. Tiger traps. These were indeed large, spiked boards or planks that were weighted to fall from above. They were typically rigged with a tripwire, and when this wire was triggered, the trap would release, causing the spiked board to fall onto anyone below it. The spikes, often made of metal or sharpened bamboo, were designed to cause maximum injury or death upon impact. Tiger traps were part of the array of booby traps used by the Viet Cong during the Vietnam War. They were strategically placed in areas where they were likely to be triggered by enemy troops, such as along narrow jungle paths or near encampments. The design of these traps took advantage of gravity, making them simple yet highly effective at inflicting casualties. Booby-trapped ammunition, Project Eldest Son. The countermeasure you are referring to is known as Project Eldest Son. This covert operation was conducted by the U.S. during the Vietnam War, where U.S. Special Forces and intelligence assets deliberately inserted sabotaged ammunition into the supply chains of the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army. The sabotage involved replacing the propellant in weapon cartridges with an explosive, which was typically in sufficient quantity to burst the weapon from which it was fired, potentially killing or injuring the user. The primary goal of Project Eldest Son was to sow distrust and fear among the enemy forces regarding the reliability of their ammunition supplies.
The strapado, also known as garrucha, was a form of torture used during the Spanish Inquisition and other periods. It involved suspending the victim by the wrists, which were tied behind the back. This method typically resulted in the dislocation of the shoulders and could cause severe pain and long-term damage to the nerves, ligaments, and tendons. There are 3 variants of strapado. Basic strapado. The victim's arms were tied behind their back, and they were suspended by a rope attached to their wrists. This caused intense pain and potential dislocation of the shoulders. Squasation. This variant involved a series of drops, where the victim was allowed to fall until their descent was abruptly stopped by the rope. This added a jerking motion that increased the stress on the shoulders and could lead to broken bones. Weighted strapado. In this version, weights were attached to the victim's feet, increasing the strain on the arms and shoulders and causing additional pain and potential damage to the legs and hips. The rack, also known as the potro, was a notorious torture device used during the Spanish Inquisition and other periods. It consisted of a rectangular wooden frame, slightly raised from the ground, with rollers at one or both ends. The victim's ankles were fastened to one roller and the wrist to the other. As the interrogation progressed, a handle and ratchet mechanism attached to the top roller were used to gradually retract the chains, slowly increasing the strain on the prisoner's shoulders, hips, knees, and elbows, causing excruciating pain. By means of pulleys and levers, the rollers could be rotated on their own axis, straining the ropes until the sufferer's joints were dislocated and eventually separated. Water torture, known as toca or tortura del agua, was a method used during the Spanish Inquisition that closely resembles modern waterboarding. This form of torture involved placing a cloth in the victim's mouth and then pouring water over it. The water would saturate the cloth, making it difficult for the victim to breathe and creating the sensation of drowning. This method was designed to induce extreme physical and psychological distress without leaving visible marks on the body. The boot, also known as the Spanish boot, was a form of torture that involved placing a wooden or iron frame around the victim's foot and tightening it to crush the bones. This method was designed to inflict excruciating pain and cause severe injury without necessarily leading to death. The boot was typically made of wood or iron and was designed to encase the victim's foot and sometimes the lower leg. The frame was tightened using wedges or a crank mechanism. As the device was tightened, it applied increasing pressure to the foot, crushing the bones and lacerating the flesh. The thumbscrew, also known as thumbkin or thumbikin, was a torture device first used in early modern Europe. It was a simple vise designed to crush the fingers or thumbs of the victim, often causing extreme pain and permanent damage. The victim's thumbs or fingers were placed between the iron bars. As the torturer turned the screw, the bars would tighten, crushing the appendages beneath an iron bar. Some versions included sharp points or studs on the interior surfaces to puncture the nails and increase the pain. Whipping, also known as flogging, was a common form of punishment during the Spanish Inquisition. This method involved beating the victim with a whip or similar instrument, often causing severe physical pain and injury. The whip used during the Spanish Inquisition was often a multi-tailed device, sometimes stiffened by being dipped in melted pitch, which would tear the flesh with each stroke. The number of lashes varied depending on the severity of the crime and the discretion of the inquisitors. Sentences could range from a few dozen to several hundred lashes. The breast ripper, also known as the iron spider, or simply the spider, was a gruesome torture device used primarily on women during the Middle Ages, including the period of the Spanish Inquisition. This device was designed to mutilate the breasts of female victims, often as punishment for crimes such as adultery, abortion, or other offenses deemed severe by the inquisitors. The device was clamped onto a single breast, and the torturer would then pull or tear the breast away from the body. In some cases, the claws were heated to increase the pain and damage. The breaking wheel, also known as the Catherine wheel, was a brutal method of execution used primarily in Europe from antiquity through the Middle Ages and into the early 19th century. This device was designed to inflict maximum pain and suffering on the condemned, often leading to a slow and agonizing death. The condemned person was tied to the wheel, either spread-eagled or face down. The executioner would then use a heavy iron bar or hammer to break the victim's bones, starting with the legs and working upwards. The goal was to cause severe mutilation without immediate death. Starvation, as a method of torture, involved depriving victims of food and water, leading to severe physical and psychological suffering. This method was used during the Spanish Inquisition and other historical periods to break the will of prisoners and extract confessions or information. Burning coals were used as a method of torture during the Spanish Inquisition and other historical periods. This method involved placing hot coals on various parts of the victim's body, causing severe burns and excruciating pain. The primary goal was to inflict extreme pain to coerce confessions or information from the victim. It was also used as a form of punishment and intimidation. Burning coals were often used in conjunction with other torture methods, such as the rack or strapido, to increase the overall suffering of the victim. Burning at the stake was a common method of execution used during the Spanish Inquisition and other historical periods, particularly for those found guilty of heresy. This method involved tying the condemned person to a large wooden stake and setting a fire beneath them, leading to death by burning. Executions by burning were often public events intended to serve as a deterrent to others. Large crowds would gather to witness the execution, which was sometimes accompanied by sermons or other religious ceremonies. In some instances, mechanisms were used to shorten the victim's suffering, such as attaching a container of gunpowder to the victim, which would explode when heated by the fire, or strangling the victim before the fire was lit. Comment below which time period's punishments you want to learn about.